Hello, I am Tyler Esselman.
And I am Michael Osinski.
And you are listening to This One Goes to 11.
This One Goes to 11. It's our podcast. It's our podcast where we invite someone to share an album with us, an album of music, usually, that they believe is perfect.
So perfect, in fact, Michael, that 10 out of 10 just isn't good enough.
It is not, and
Nope.
It will never be.
Season 5, Episode 2, and it's still not good enough. So we're just going to keep rolling with that.
We got ourselves a concept. We're going to stick with it.
We do. This one has been a long time coming. Really a formative figure in my life, and somebody who I have great love for, and somebody who is a dear friend of the pod, who I'm pretty sure is one of our regular listeners. I'm sure he's listened to just about every episode. And who are we talking to today?
We're talking to, I believe, maybe twice runner-up in our online contest, Doug Morrell. Who's Doug? Who's Mr. M, Tyler?
Doug Morrell, Mr. Morrell to me, that is. Mr. Morrell is, as we talk about in the episode, he is the father of one of my best friends, Andrew Morrell, former guest on the pod. And he is one heck of a guy. He wrote us an excellent bio, and he wrote it in the first person. And I think it's worth reading in the first person just because of how clear his voice is. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to take on the role of Mr. Morrell here.
Right, go for it. You've got acting chops.
I did go to acting school.
Yeah, you can do that. Do you need to do any vocal warm-ups?
Okay.
Okay.
I spent my formative years in upstate New York, near Syracuse, with 5 siblings. My father was a physician, but I think he would have rather been a musician. We were raised on a steady diet of classical music. I started out on piano and had probably 6 years of lessons, hated it, and now regret hating it. In middle school, my piano teacher quit. Was it me? Probably the happiest day of my life to that point. And I had already taken up the baritone horn in the school concert band. We did no marching band, and did well with it, despite its frumpy connotation. I also played trombone, valve trombone that is, in the jazz band, and really enjoyed that too. After hearing Switched on Bach, which, spoiler alert, that's the album we're talking about, I was hooked on synthesizers. I would seek out recordings which featured synths, which led me into the world of jazz rock fusion and prog rock, which later expanded into big band and straight ahead jazz. Current interests are working on my 50-year-old car, a Volvo named Tang, as well as my newer cars, also Volvos. Cycling, photography, drone flying, and travel. Professionally, I am a partner in a small consulting firm in the healthcare IT space. He does a lot of stuff. He is a hobbyist, and Mr. Morrell, Doug Morrell, rules. It's a great episode.
Yeah, this is, and I guess I had heard of this album before, but had never actually heard it.
Mm-hmm.
And dear listeners, just a couple quick things. First of all, you will know this album is not available on Spotify, so we're going to share a few little clips of it with you during the episode. Also, maybe you won't be able to tell, but like we had to record things a little bit differently this time.
Yeah.
So if something sounds a little funny, just know that we're okay, and it's all going to be okay.
And just know that it's my fault.
It's not, don't blame yourself. Or don't blame yourself for a like multimedia conglomerate that is like creating a monopoly on this country and making it difficult for all of us to access internet without paying an arm and a leg.
It looks pretty good from our soapboxes, Michael.
God. Anyway. All right. We should just get to the episode, right?
Let's talk to Mr. Morrell.
All right. Here we go. Doug Morrell, welcome to This One Goes to 11.
Well, thanks for having me.
It has been a highly anticipated guest appearance. Yours. You have been among our most active, I guess we could say, participants in the online discourse surrounding this podcast. So you're an essential part of the This One Goes to 11 ecosystem, Mr. M.
Well, and Tyler, you're easy to talk to, so I guess that's part of it, right?
Oh, well, thank you. You've always been the same.
But no, I enjoy what you guys do. It's interesting. I can't say I always like all the albums people talk about, but hey, that's life, right? I mean,
you're not supposed to, genuinely.
And I'm sure people will tune in and see me and maybe head for the exit right off the bat. I don't know.
Hey, some people see our names on the Spotify page and they say, I've had about enough of them. So we'll just peace out.
Yeah, we've had some complaints.
Official letters. You have no idea the lengths to which people will go to complain about us. It's official letters with postage and everything. I don't know how they found my address.
Wow. Well, you get the letter from the FCC, then I guess you know you're in trouble.
That's it. That's the one.
We're waiting for that one. Fingers crossed.
I think that'll give us some cred, though. That's the thing. Thank you so much for coming on and coming before This One Goes to 11 tribunal. We're gonna get real serious this season, Mr. M. It's gonna be really high standards, and I hope you came prepared.
I need a towel. I'm starting to sweat already.
Well, it's the humidity there in St. Louis.
The hot lamps are on.
It's true. So why don't you tell us, what album hath thou brought before This One Goes to 11 tribunal today?
I have brought the groundbreaking landmark album by Wendy Carlos called Switched on Bach.
Switched on Bach. That's hyphenated switched on for those of you who are just listening to this and not looking at the album cover. Rather whimsical, fun album cover, by the way. I think that really adds to the package. I there's a lot of mystique and a lot of mystery, I should say, with the album cover. In colloquially, I think the album is referred to as SOB. So we can SOB, right?
We can refer to it as SOB if you want.
I've been referred to that too. I've been referred to as that.
All right, so. we don't want to confuse anyone, but anyways,
10,000 points.
But the first album cover that came out, Bach was sitting on this piano bench in with a tortured look on his face, and it was referred to as shitting Bach or crapping Bach. The artist didn't like that cover, so it was pulled after a month or two, and then this other picture was used with standing Bach.
Wasn't also didn't Wendy Carlos not like the cover because also the way on the first cover, the way that the synthesizer was plugged in, it wasn't actually plugged in, like it wouldn't have been playing anything?
That's right. Yeah, like the headphones were plugged into some oscillator jack or something like that, and and there was no output possible whatsoever. I don't even think the power cord was plugged in, so it was kind of a sloppy rendition. Of course, she and the other her collaborator Rachel Elkind weren't even present during the photo shoot, I think. So that's how things like that happen.
I want you to also before we get into everyone's favorite segment, which Michael will be doing today. I want you to help us put to bed an argument, not really an argument, more of a back and forth about the pronunciation of the name of the synthesizer. Do you say Moog or do you say Moog?
Well, and actually I figured we'd cover that too. Yes, it is Moog. Long
Moog.
O. Okay. We all said Moog back in the day because we didn't really know any better. But yeah, it is Moog.
Well, Doug, before we get too far and before you share too much information with us, we got to make sure our listeners know what's going on here. And so we have to take a few seconds, 60 to be precise, for a little segment that I have been told by many people, well, not many people, by one person many times, is everyone's favorite segment. And that is a beginner's guide to Wendy Carlos's Switched on Bach in 60 seconds. I'll deliver it. Tyler's going to time me. Doug, you're going to evaluate how I do. You feel up to the task?
Yes, I really look forward to it.
All right.
You relish the opportunity.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Tyler, you ready?
I am. 60 seconds are on the clock. We're starting in 3, 2, 1.
Electronic music pioneer Wendy Carlos grew up in Rhode Island and developed her music chops at Brown and Columbia before working as a freelance composer for TV adverts. In 1964, she met a man by the name of Moog, Robert Moog, and played a key role in developing the Moog synthesizer. Soon, she was making music full-time, and in 1968, she released the album Switched on Bach, a collection of 12 songs by Baroque composer J.S. Bach, played on the Moog, with the hope of showing the public that electronic music isn't all that dark and heavy. The result? It reached number 10 on the Billboard albums chart. It was the number one classical album for almost 3 years straight. And in 1970, it won 3 Grammys, making Carlos the first transgender artist to win the coveted award. Though she'd much prefer you focus on the music than on her gender. If you haven't heard this album, which is very possible because she hasn't released it for streaming, you may recognize her work from the films A Clockwork Orange, The Shining, Tron, and most recently, Ready Player One. And while music is her main jam, she also makes visual art, and she's quite fond of cats and eclipses.
Ooh, there it is. All right.
That's 60.
Good for you.
I do my homework.
Wow.
So, Mr. M, how did he do?
Yeah.
How did he do as a effort of synthesizing the work of Wendy Carlos, if you will?
Ooh, that was smooth.
Was it though?
I'm just being nice. Well, it was excellent. I mean, you really were able to pack in a lot more than I thought you would in 60 seconds, and partly maybe because you were speaking so fast. But I would say, I'd say that this is definitely like a solid A minus. The only thing that I might say enhance with is back at the beginning. Moog had already developed the synthesizer, but it didn't really have a keyboard. It wasn't very accessible for musicians, and it wasn't very easy. And other companies had actually electronic music devices that were very large. So she did approach him about doing something more musician friendly, and they started to collaborate in say like 65 or so. And that's kind of how that. But that's kind of getting nitpicky, I think.
Well, an A minus is pretty damn good, I gotta say.
No, that's really good. So it's a groundbreaking album for all the reasons you mentioned and more. I mean, even I think as we go through this, I hope to convey that to your listeners that while they may not think they're that interested in this album, it to this day has a huge impact in just about everything that you may hear in the music world, in any genre. So it just busted the door wide open for the use of electronics in the musical recording side of the world.
Oh my gosh, great. Well, we got an A minus on the board. Strong start to your case, because that will contribute to your case ultimately for this album's perfection. But before we get more into the album, let's talk about you, Mr. Morrell. And I'm just going to call you Mr. Morrell because I've always called you Mr. Morrell, and I can't in good conscience call you Doug. I don't know.
Do you need to tell your listeners why you're calling me Mr. Morrell?
I'm calling him Mr. Morrell because Doug Morrell is the father of one of my best good friends in my entire life, Andrew Morrell, friend of the pod, who you might have heard talk about a one Wu-Tang Clan album a couple seasons ago, to great effect, I might add. But so I've known you since I was 13, so I kind of just have to call you Mr. Morrell.
No, that's okay.
That's what we're going to go with. But let's talk about you. So I want to, as you know, as somebody who listens to the podcast, we like to open up this conversation by talking about your relationship with music. What role does it play in your life on a day-to-day basis and throughout the course of your life?
Well, that's a big question. Do we have like 30 extra minutes?
Of course we do.
To get through that. No. Music is fundamental to so many aspects of my life, and really has been for a long time. I came from, I guess you'd call it a musical family, or at least I had a musical parent in the form of my father, who was a classically trained in several things, the pipe organ or organ. He sang, he played trumpet, etc. And my parents decided, I guess early on, that the way they were going to raise their children was that each of the children, and there were 6 of us, it was the Brady Bunch. Truly, we just didn't have Alice. We all had to take a musical instrument. We had to have a musical instrument of study. And my father was big in the music scene locally in Syracuse, as far as just kind of in the going to the symphony. They had season tickets for the Syracuse Symphony. He was the replacement organist for the organ. He was a benefactor to the local classical music station, knew all the musicians in town, and so on. As such, he was actually a physician. I should add. He was, a physician with a lot of hobbies, in which music was his biggest one. But, he built his showplace home that was centered all around the organ in the house. So 3 3-keyboard, 3-manual organ with a cathedral ceiling in the living room. And, it was a big, kind of a huge room, let's just say 20-foot ceiling. We'd have people over at parties, that kind of thing. Music was always central. He was always educating about music, like, you got to listen to this piece. I think he bored a lot of his friends to death with some of that stuff, but and he tried to educate us as well as kids.
Well, you had to let him bore you. I guess that's the lot of the child is to you better be bored.
That's right. And we were also not allowed to touch his stereo. Okay,
oh, geez.
That sounds until we got older. But anyways, I do vaguely remember when Switched on Bach came out, because it created obviously quite a stir in the classical world. And I can remember him playing it at home on the stereo as kind of a novelty thing to, when we have a party or people come over, he'd say, hey, you got to listen to this. He'd throw on some of the Switched on Bach. I'm not sure, though, that he really liked it that much. It was more kind of, like topic of conversation, because I think it kind of, it tapered off, at least interest-wise with him. But it really triggered my interest in electronic music. I found it fascinating. I think it was like just looking at the cover, I was like, wow, that looks really cool. Because here I am taking piano lessons on a regular piano, a nice piano, but a regular piano. Well, look what I could, look at this keyboard with all these dials and chords. This looks really cool. So, I just kind of got interested in that kind of stuff. And when he was at home, I would play that album on his stereo with headphones on. And when you do that, when you listen to this album with headphones, which I would really, really encourage, with a good, decent set of headphones, the recording quality is just superb. And just the engineering of it, and the sound balancing, and the way that the different voices are highlighted, and it just comes through really, really well. So later on in life, when I was able to afford to buy my own albums, I would buy the additional albums that Wendy Carlos put out. And there's, as Michael mentioned, there's the soundtrack albums, but there's also, she just Switched on Bach 2, which is in many ways even better, because of course they had better engineering capabilities. Like, I don't know if it was 5 or 6 years later. And she did a few other classical pieces, classical interpretations, I should say. Plus, a lot of other people jumped on her bandwagon with other classical interpretations on the Moog or other brand of synthesizer. So I had those albums as well. And there's a album called The Moog Strikes Bach. There's one called Switched on Rock, which so it just kind of snowballed that way, with people trying to kind of like cash in on what was going on, the phenomena. But back to your original question. Yeah. So music, high school band, we did that. I lost interest in the piano. I had an interest. It was a lot of aspects of it. Who likes to practice, right? It wasn't, I think the happiest day of my life was when the piano teacher called and said she wasn't going to do lessons anymore. She was taking a position as a music teacher at the school.
900 points to your teacher for quitting on you. It sounds like it was a gift.
That's right. So
that's the frustrating thing, right? When you're young and you're trying to be social and develop yourself as a social individual, and you're like, or I could stay inside for an hour and a half and practice piano by myself and not develop social skills. So there's that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So it was I guess I should say the door was opened with Switched on Bach.
Yeah.
And my interest and fascination with synthesizers. At one point, one of my younger brothers was taking music lessons, and he came home and he said, well, they got something down there called a synthesizer. So I went down to the music store and saw that they actually had what was then new, the Mini Moog, which was the transformational instrument as far as rock music went, and jazz fusion. Matter of fact, I have right here. I haven't thrown it out yet. This is a 2020 calendar. 2020 was the 50th anniversary of the Mini Moog, and Moog put out this really nice calendar of all the different histories. And my daughter Amanda got me this for Christmas, and of course it's 2023, and I still got it hanging up on my wall.
3,000 points to Amanda for giving you that as a Christmas gift. That is excellent gift giving prowess.
So I remember coming home from that music store and saying to my father, Dad, they got a Mini Moog down there. We got to buy one.
Yeah.
It looks cool. You know, I can play it. I'll learn how to play it. He's like, what do you want that for? That's nothing. That's just a toy, and it's a $5,000 toy at that. You know, it's pretty damn expensive.
Damn. In 1970 dollars, that's 5,000. That's a whole lot of money.
Yeah, it's a whole lot of money. So needless to say, we did not get one. I mean, I think he may have said something to the effect of, "Look, I got this huge organ here with 500 sounds on it. What do you want to play with that for?" You know,
right?
You know, with 3 keyboards and a foot, you know, pedal board, and oh boy, you know, well, all right. So that never happened. It kind of frustrates me. So I kind of just lived vicariously through the albums that I would buy.
Okay. Did you ever try to make them yourself? Were you that kind of kid? Were you tinkering? Were you a soldering kid? You strike me as somebody who soldered.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because my father was into the Heathkit world. If you're familiar with those things,
a little bit.
They were electronic kits that you could buy.
Okay,
Radios, TVs, clocks, all kinds of stuff, even stereos, and very great step-by-step instruction booklets. And yes, I got into that. I was soldering away and following. I made like a stereo equalizer, and I still have a clock. I'm not using it, but I have an electronic digital readout clock. But
wow,
yes, there was not through Heathkit, but there was a build your own kind of synthesizer with a small keyboard that you could buy. And I did see that in high school. I was very, very tempted, but I didn't pull the trigger on that either. So,
you know, it's never too late. You could do it now.
Yeah, right.
So, I mean, was electronic music your main jam at that time? Because I'm just looking at the other albums that you suggested to us when you sent us your list, and they don't quite match this album. And I'm wondering, were you listening to electronic music a lot, or were you listening to lots of different things at the time?
I was listening to, you know, after the electronic classical music stuff ran its course into the mid, you know, say it's like 73, 74. And then I was buying albums. I would really focus on, usually, instrumental groups, which led me into the jazz fusion world really heavy, but instrumental stuff, and that would feature, you know, good keyboard work, especially, you know, Mini Moog work. So,
yeah,
a lot of Chick Corea, Return to Forever.
Hell yeah.
A lot of Jan Hammer or Mahavishnu Orchestra.
That's so rad. Yep.
And you know, it's like and then I really got into the, you know, looking at the way in the jazz world that the musicians would play on each other's albums or other people's albums. So, you know, if I was in like Stanley Clarke, well, here's Stanley over here on this album. Let's go get that album. That takes me down another branch, you know, of a different artist. So, and then there was a lot of the British-oriented prog rock stuff that I kind of fell in with, you know, the intricate keyboard stuff, even piano stuff. I was into Renaissance. I don't know if you ever listened to Renaissance before, the old vintage Renaissance. I
haven't.
Very classically styled British rock. It's like Genesis, but not quite like extreme or you know, off on the fringe as the early Genesis was. You just have to listen to a few. Yeah, I can give you some things to look at later. So yeah, that's my musical forays. You know, then Pat Metheny and the Steely Dan came up when I was a freshman in college, when Asia was big. I should just tell you this one little anecdote. It's just a kind of nostalgic thing, and you'll think, geez, you guys are really backwards back then. You had to do that. But where I went to school in Atlanta at Georgia Tech, in the student center or student union, you might call it, they had what they called a music listening room. And this was like my home away from home in college, because what they had was a large room with a counter, and behind the counter they had essentially what is a DJ, and they had different stations around the room with chairs at them, and they'd issue you a set of headphones, turn in your ID, get a set of headphones, and the DJ would pull up whatever album you wanted. And they had, banks and banks. They probably had 2,000 albums there.
Oh, I love that.
And you'd go plug in at where you're sitting there, and they would play the album. So I spent a lot of time there listening to Asia, just fascinated with that recording. But well, we could talk about that another time.
We could also talk about the fact that you went to school in Athens, Georgia. Music capital.
Time out. No, not Athens. No.
Was it not Athens?
No, Atlanta. Athens.
Oh, it was in Atlanta. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, our tribals are in Athens, so I can't.
That's right. I'm sorry.
Let that go uncorrected. But yes,
right.
I was at Georgia Tech. I was on the student concert committee, so we were in charge of bringing in the acts to perform. And then when the acts do come in, we function as roadies, which is no pay.
Right.
Hauling that stuff around. But anyways, so a lot of stuff came out of Athens.
It did. I apologize to all my Georgia, all my Georgia connected people. I should not. That's
all right. We don't want to open up a lot of college rivalries now, but
tribalism, yeah.
But the funny thing, on the committee, one of our guys had a girlfriend in Athens, and she went to University of Georgia, which he had our condolences. But he came back from Athens after a weekend trip to one of our committee mates. He says, "Oh, guys, I just saw the greatest band. We got to get them down here to play for us. They are just the greatest thing in the world." And we're like, "Yeah, who's that?" And he says, "They're called REM." We're like, "Oh, that's a stupid name."
It is a stupid name, to be fair.
And we're not getting any Athens bands down here. We're not getting a bunch of University of Georgia people coming down here. No, we're not hiring them. But we passed an opportunity probably to get in on the ground floor with REM.
But at least you get 7,000 points for that right now on this podcast, at the very least, for sticking to your principles.
That's right.
They're a band that, when I hear them, I immediately think, and maybe it's because of all the music journalism I've read and everything I've heard, I feel like when I hear REM, I think immediately college rock, whatever that means. And we talk about genre all the time on this podcast and how meaningless it is, but that's always what sticks out to me. That almost like they're kind of the beginning. They're not really, I would say, the beginning of the indie movement, but the sort of indie sound, I guess, I feel like REM is kind of the band that
absolutely
that kicked that off, I guess.
Yeah, they were definitely a bar band out of Athens. That was their thing, and they probably even played the fraternities up there at the time, just to gig.
I love that. It's one of my favorite stories of you. It's one of my favorite stories that you turned them down. I think about it. I closely associate that with you. So I'll give you 1,500 more points for just being present in the musical hotbed of Georgia at that time. That's a feather.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. I was fortunate that the dorm I lived in, and I was a dorm dog, and I proudly say that but I was able to live on campus because it was close to the music scene. I had just a 3 or 4 block walk to get to one of the best clubs in town, kind of like Tyler, you would know here in St. Louis, the Pageant.
Yep.
It was about the same size and equivalent to the Pageant. I saw some really great stuff coming through there. We also had right across the street from that, or down the block from the Pageant, or not the Pageant, it's called the Agora Ballroom, but down the block was the Fox Theater, which is, it's even bigger than the St. Louis Fox Theater. So there was always good stuff coming through there.
So we've let's return a little bit to the album that we're here to talk about today, and we have to do this one a little bit differently than the way we usually do this because, as I mentioned before, Wendy Carlos has not released pretty much any of her music aside from some of the stuff from soundtracks. She hasn't released any of it for streaming, and so what we're going to do this time instead is talk about a couple standout tracks that you mentioned to us. We've got one we want to talk about briefly, and we're gonna for our listeners, we're gonna play just a little snippet of the song for them. But maybe you can touch on how each of these tracks strikes you, or how when you first heard it, what the experience was like, or basically whatever you want to say about the tracks, just to get people to sort of understand why the album was so significant and why these particular tracks are ones that might want to listen to. So the first one you mentioned to us is actually the opening track, which is the Sinfonia. I believe you say it's Sinfonia to Cantata number 29. Let's have our listeners give a little listen.
This track, and it's the first one, the record opens. If you're totally unfamiliar with synthesizer sound, which back in the late 60s, early 70s, this was new stuff to a lot of people. This would probably right off the bat just, put your jaw on the floor, or, just really knock you back.
It's triumphant.
Yeah, it's very triumphant. It's bold. I would call it brassy if there were any brass, but of course it's not.
Right. It captures that though. It is brassy. I think that's the beauty of it.
And it just has a lot of moving parts in it, which is really what Bach was famous for. His nearly mathematical way that he constructed songs together.
Yeah, the original math rock artist, everybody, J.S. Bach.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. and it's with the quality of the recording or the engineering quality, you can really hear everything.
Yeah.
With this thing, you can hear all the parts, and we probably should note, which we haven't really said anything yet, is this recording was made in Wendy Carlos's home.
Yep.
Yeah.
On an 8-track machine
that she built herself, right?
She assembled the pieces together with Bob Moog. And the other thing to note is that it's recorded on a keyboard, but back in those days it was one note at a time.
Yes.
So you were
let's say that again. It was one note at a time that this was conceived, everyone.
That's right. So, and there's no digital storage of your setting,
No.
It's knobs and it's wires like an old-fashioned phone operator console. So if you found a sound that you liked and you wanted to kind of bank it for later on, you had to stop and you had to get out your clipboard, I guess, and write down how all the different modules were set and the knobs and the wires and so on, and just hope you could get back to that sound again.
I read actually that she didn't, they said she didn't even need to make note of that because she got so good at it at a certain point that she was able to just change the settings herself and didn't even have to take any notes.
Yeah, that's just amazing.
And that it also would consistently slide out of tune after almost every note is something that I read.
Yeah, there was perpetual tuning issues, and I think they corrected that. Over time with just getting better oscillators, sound generators out there that kind of work better.
And dear listeners, just so you know, if you check out this episode and on our YouTube channel and the playlist, we are going to provide a link to a great interview that she did with the BBC, where she sort of explains how a synthesizer works. So if you're if you're clueless in terms of what we're talking about here regarding knobs and buttons and oscillators and whatnot, she explains it pretty well, I think.
Very well.
Part of it still goes over my head because there's only so much beeps and boops I can understand, but she's got it all down.
But it's amazing that she kind of breaks it down to the fundamental element, which is the wave of sound, right? Which is, I think that she does a really great job expressing that in this short document. It's very short and she's very engaging. So definitely check it out if you can.
Yeah. That's true. It's what's kind of striking is that today you take all that for granted. You've got electronic keyboard. Every band has at least one, probably five or whatever. And sampling, is real big. So the sounds are already stored digitally in memory, and all you got to do is push a button, and you can shape it and you do certain effects with it, certainly, but you don't have to do anything to create that or build that sound. So this track, so it's a very energetic piece, lots of fanfare. It's got like a lot of these tracks do, and since I'm a low brass player in the band, I kind of gravitate.
You and me both, and Andrew.
Yeah, that's right.
Hell yeah.
Baritones rule, right?
Baritones do rule. We both played the euphonium, and I bet we were great at it. I'm going to give us 6,000 points, Mr. Morrell, for both playing the euphonium.
I think we need points, and I think we need like a poker chip kind of.
Yeah. Or like little hats.
Just to cash in.
Yes.
Yeah, we had fun. And then I played valve trombone in jazz band because I didn't want to bother to learn how to slide that thing.
Yeah. And Andrew Morrell, one of the finest trombone players I've ever met. Very good trombone player.
God rest his soul. Oh, wait, he's still living. Well,
what about this second track then, Michael? How about we talk a little bit about the track that you identified as sort of our standout, but for personal reasons for you, right?
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about the third track on this album, which is two-part of Invention in F major. Let's let our listeners listen to just a little bit of that, and then we'll talk about it. So I chose this song because I actually played this song because I studied piano for 13 years. So you're talking about you focus more on the brass. I mean, like this is there are two songs on this album that I actually played. I chose this one because the other one, I think there's something really strange with the recording of it. But I just remember there's something about, you mentioned like how mathematical Bach is, and I think that something that I found unique when listening to this album is sort of the struggle that I think every piano teacher / piano student, there's several struggles when you are going up against Bach. One of them being, how do you make your hands do all those things? Because often he just has like 5 different voices running at the same time, but we only have 2 hands. But the other thing is that, a lot of times the pieces that Bach composed were for the clavichord or the harpsichord, which did not have dynamics really, since they were stringed instruments. They were plucked, not the way we think of like a violin or a viola, but they were stringed instruments, and you couldn't really control volume in any way. And I think that I remember my piano teacher always encouraging me to, like, we would add our own dynamics to things, because she basically thought, hey, if Bach were around today, this is what he would do.
Yeah.
But I think something that Wendy does excellently on this album is, since we can play with dynamics, like not only is everything so technically precise, but there is also a musicality to everything that she makes on this album. Do you agree with that, Doug?
Oh yeah, definitely. There's through the mixing and the balance, especially in the stereophonic left right. There's definitely a benefit to that. Because I don't know what you think, Michael, but just Bach straight, especially just the harpsichord stuff or the clav stuff, it just sounds so sterile, because it's past the technical achievement that it takes to just play something like that. I've always just found it kind of, it's kind of delicate and it's not really what you might like to see or hear nowadays, at least as far as those solo instruments go.
Yeah. I mean, I think most people that I studied piano with, like we would always add more musicality to it. I mean, I think I only studied, so the listeners, if you're not familiar, J.S. Bach had 2 volumes called the Well-Tempered Clavier, which basically each edition features 24 songs that are preludes and fugues in every single key that an instrument can go in. There's a whole explanation for why it's called the Well-Tempered Clavier, but we're not going to go into it now because it's like AP level like sound stuff.
Music,
But I mean, like, I remember when I would my teacher had me buy the whole book, and I'm like, are we going to go through all of these? And she's like, no, only some of them are good. And I was like, oh, okay, hot take. But I mean, there are some pieces you can almost feel like he wishes that the instrument could do more, because some of them have more I don't know, more variation, more excitement, more chance for different voices to sing out. And I mean, that's something that, I mean, maybe in some ways, because of the way that she recorded this album, it made it easier for her to accentuate those voices. That might be the only thing that was easier about recording Bach, is that you could record each voice separately instead of trying to do all 5 of them with your 2 hands.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it blends itself to that type of approach that she had to take, I think. And I think it definitely pays off.
I wanted to ask a little bit. I want to poke both of you guys a little bit on the experience of listening to the, out and out, kind of like classically performed version of this versus the Carlos version. What do you think? Is it an equivalent experience to you, I guess, in terms of listening to classical music, just done in different ways, or is it a different experience entirely?
You want me to go first?
Yeah, please.
I actually, I don't find Bach on the chamber music or the chamber period instruments to be that interesting to me. It's okay. And I do like a lot of classical music. I think in the classical realm, I'm more of the romantic period, Beethoven type stuff. I do like the Bach organ stuff, Toccata and Fugue, D minor, the classic 2001 Space Odyssey type, that's where that came from. Something that's a little big, heavier, richer. Yeah, I think I like that stuff in its original instrumentation. But I just find this much more appealing to me. The electronics version.
Is it because of what it took to execute it? You think is it an intellectual stimulation or is it more of like oral? It's more orally stimulating for you, like the actual voices that you're hearing.
I'd say it's probably 70% one way, 30% the other. I think the technical aspect of it, the richness, the more modern, or actually very modern approach and sound to it, I think that appealed to me.
Michael, what about you? For you, is this equivalent to going to the symphony in some ways, or is it equivalent to listening to, more classically recorded album? Because for me, I'm trying to discern that for myself.
I mean, there's a few things I will say. First of all, I have to say I was a little triggered listening to Bach and remembering having to like rehearse these songs.
Sure.
So there's that. But I mean, I grew up playing classical music in all forms. I mean, part of studying piano was that you had to learn some Baroque pieces, some classical pieces, some romantic pieces, and some contemporary or modern pieces, or whatever they call the contemporary musical era. I'm not even sure what it is.
I have no idea.
For me, Doug, you said something earlier about how the album kind of felt almost like a novelty to you.
Yes.
And I think that's...
Or to his dad.
Or to your dad. Yeah. I think that, I mean, for me, that it actually kind of feels like that to me, because I do enjoy, if I hear a Bach piece, depending on what it is, it's musically pleasing to me. I will say that it does. One of the questions I was going to have for you, Doug, was, when do you listen to this album now? Because for me, it does just feel like it's a novelty thing that you play for someone, or that you use to great effect, or you use like ironically in a piece of theater or something like that. I don't know that I would necessarily, blare it out of my car speakers or anything like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, honestly, I'd say it's probably not more than once a year that I might listen to this or one of the other, variations on it. I mean, these days, back in the day, I think, I would probably listen to it couple times a week through my high school years. And I think this LP that I've got, this one is actually my father's that he had.
Awesome.
I don't think I bought this one myself, but I would listen to it, frequently. And interesting, I think, Michael, you probably felt a lot about it, or I think my father and you would probably agree 100%. And it's one of the little anecdotes about is that after I assembled a collection of these electronically recorded or these synthesized classical pieces, I made my father a mixtape for Father's Day because I was cheap or something, didn't want to buy anything, but
cheeky. I like it.
I just took the tunes that I thought were my favorites off of like 5 or 6 different albums and put it on cassette. I think I even called it Classotronic Hits for Dad. And I was like, Dad, you can listen to this on your way to work in the morning. And I think he just went, okay, that's nice. Thanks. And I'm pretty sure it didn't get played in his car at all.
Oh, hell. You get 999 points for that, though. So for Classotronic Hits for Dad, at least you get that.
Yeah, it's funny, the things you remember. But I think he definitely was old school. He liked the favorites, the traditional stuff, and that was it.
As an engine for innovation, I feel like this is a really interesting case study, right? Because you see somebody who is like developing this technology from scratch, essentially, and through like pure, just kind of like inspiration, and using the vernacular, using like an agreed upon, respected vernacular to demonstrate its power. I think like that is such a powerful thing about this album that I think it takes it beyond novelty, really, right? Because it's novelty when you first hear it, but then when you understand the context, it really groundbreaking. That word has been thrown around a lot, but I think you were right to use that word because there is a lot of power in using new technology to translate something new, and then it opens you up to more possibility if you can do the classic stuff with your new, in your new way.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. It's like back at the time, and I think this is true with technology of all kinds, even today, is that it's impossible to foresee. I mean, people may try, but it's possible to predict what, if anything, is going to evolve out of it. And
right.
There were probably people that thought that this wasn't going to go anywhere, especially if they thought they were going to get Wendy Carlos to sit down on a concert stage with this thing and play Bach, one note at a time.
Right.
But apparently she did do some concerts, and I was reading that
with the St. Louis Symphony, right?
With the St. Louis Symphony, yes. And I was like, man, I got to get a hold of that review to see what the heck exactly did she do. But anyways, but so who could foresee the impact that this would have, say, in rock music? Because the rock people picked up on it pretty quick because it gave them a new outlet, beyond the electric guitar. There was certainly, you had Hendrix out there doing all kinds of distortion things with the guitar, but there wasn't really anybody doing anything with the keyboard. You had your electric, you had your Fender Rhodes, maybe you had your Hammond B3, maybe the thing called the Mellotron, which is another whole, little gizmo.
Great names, just like across the board. All of them have amazing names.
Yeah, but now the synthesizer comes along, and then when Moog came out with the Mini Moog, that really enhanced the portability of it. It was still one note at a time, but it allowed the keyboard guy or gal to kind of come out of the shadows and really kind of blow people's mind.
There's one more track you gave us, which is one of the movements. Well, as you suggested, but we can't obviously play all of it. But maybe we can listen to a little bit from one movement of the Brandenburg Concerto, and you can tell us a little bit about why that's another standout track for you. So let's listen for a second.
All right, so this one is a bigger piece, bigger orchestration. There's more pieces involved, more instruments, that is, and it's a great bouncy tune. I mean, I can almost picture like the Baroque era people with their powdered wigs and their big puffy dresses and stuff doing their little dances in the grand hall,
whatever they're all called. Yeah.
Yeah. And but it's
bunch of freaks.
It's just got
hey
in a good way. Good freaks. Good.
Yeah. Don't you shame those Baroque dancers.
I'm not. I'm saying I like freaks. Freaks only allowed here.
Getting their freak on, I think.
They were Brandenburg style, baby.
There's a total of 6 Brandenburg concerti. And what is this? This is number 2.
Number 3.
Number 3.
Actually.
Yeah, 3. Yeah. But yeah, I love the orchestration of it and the way that she introduces more sounds, very unique sounds on things to give them their own voice that comes through pretty clear. And what's interesting, I think, that comes out, and maybe it does or doesn't come out that much on, say, a regular traditional orchestration, but the looking at what's going on in the bass line and the bass instruments. Right. There's some wonderful counterpoint in there that these guys are sawing away on their basses, and then they bring them up to complement or kind of take over the melody from the higher pitched register instruments. There's just this constant kind of mix going on, this back and forth kind of trading between who's going to take the lead.
Yeah.
And you can hear that quite clearly in the recording. That it's quite nice. But it's like I said, it's a kind of a energetic, bouncy kind of tune. Just very spirited. Not unlike the first track.
Spirited is right. Spirited's a good word for the whole thing, I would say. Mm-hmm. There's a verve to it. I gave you 300 points for concerti, by the way, and I'm also going to give you 9,999 points for talking about the clarity of the album and the production overall, because I do think that is a real strength of this, and what honestly sets it apart from a lot of classical music recordings that I listen to, on the radio, or when you just pick up a random classical recording, is I think they even, Wendy, sort of, that was one of her guideposts, is she said she wanted it to be as clear as possible, not this kind of fuzzy quality to the audio that she was experiencing in a lot of other recordings of Bach. So you get a whole bunch of points for making that point so clearly, and thank you, Wendy, for doing that for us. Maybe we should talk about perfection then, because I feel like we've talked a lot about how this is groundbreaking, how this had never been done before. But now, what made you choose this as a perfect album? What rubric were you grading this album against when you presented it to us?
I had a lot to pick from, right?
You did.
I'm not going to say I have more albums than anybody else, and actually I probably don't have as many as a lot of people, but I've listened to a lot of stuff. There's a lot of things I tossed around in my mind that, should I get invited by you guys, what would I cover? And this one, it wasn't the first thing that popped. Steely Dan might have been the first thing that popped into my head. But,
with good cause.
But let's not beat that horse.
We'll allow it. Sustained.
But, I started, I was like, switched on Bach and, thinking about all the downstream effects over the years of that technology. And then the whole transgender nature of Wendy, that whole story I found kind of compelling, that, it's not necessarily what the music's about, but it still resonates today as a topic. What I found interesting in the Playboy interview, which she did in 1979, which we all read in 1979 because A, we were in college, and B, most college guys were reading Playboy in 1979.
Sure.
Right or wrong.
You're just buying it for the articles. We know
the articles. And
compelling.
Damn it! Here was an article that's worth reading.
You're damn right.
And it was, something that I knew about. It was just, it just struck me just reading that interview and reading it back, recently, that the struggles we face are still the same struggles that people face today. But even the terminology she uses, and these are things I just, maybe I'm just oblivious to, but, the fact that she did say in the interview that she didn't like the term transsexual. She would rather use transgender. And I mean, that is that's what's used today. Now, 1979, was that kind of earth shattering? I probably. We didn't make a big deal about it. I mean, I remember it was newsworthy, but I just don't remember like people going out and burning their Switching on Bach albums because they found out about this, or boycotting Columbia Records. I mean, can you believe people would even consider doing that? So it's just how, you may think of the 70s or that 40 plus years ago or 50 years ago as being backwards. But, on the one hand, we were talking about some advanced things, and nowadays we're kind of regressing to a large extent in that realm. But it was just kind of a interesting parallels with what's going on today in a lot of places.
Absolutely, we'll link to that. We'll link to that Playboy article.
And there's no pictures.
There's no pictures.
Yeah, I know that from what I had read, so I started going to her website, which, like,
interesting, right?
Yeah, I will say, first of all, it does sort of feel like, a GeoCities built website, but also, she writes a lot, and I know from reading that, like, she was a little miffed by the Playboy interview because she had stressed to them she wanted to talk about the music, right, and not as much about the fact that she was transgender. But also recently someone wrote a biography of her, and she is not a fan of that at all. It was unauthorized biography.
Oh, I did not know that. Oh.
She's got some, I think it came out in like 2020. Am I right about that, Tyler? Did you see that?
Sounds right. Yeah, I did see that.
And she there's like a screed, if I'm using that word correctly, on her website where she talks about people writing about her when they don't know anything. I mean, this, like, I think the Playboy article, like, has gotten over, but like more recently, there's when people write about her, she wants to, rightfully so. I feel like she wants to be in control of her own story. It seems like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't blame her for that.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Mr. Morrell, I'm working on this thesis. I'm working on and we don't need to go too deep on this because I think this is sort of a macro thing about this project that Michael and I are doing with this podcast. But I think one of the things I see that keeps coming up, right, is more often than not, when somebody has an album that they feel strongly enough to present as a perfect album, it's because of the whole package, right? It's because of the time in their life in which they encountered it. It's because of the music itself. It's because of the profile of the artist and what that artist meant, sort of like in an identity way to whoever we're talking to. And to me, it all feels like myth making, right? Like what happens around this album or whatever album we're talking about, it's like a myth is created, a legend almost, that is greater than the sum of its parts. And this is I think this is a strong supporting document for this thesis that I'm working on, this particular album and your particular connection with it. I also do just want to say it's very gratifying for me, having grown up with Andrew, your son, and knowing the kind of music that he was listening to when we were in high school. Like, he was listening to Aphex Twin and a lot of ambient music that I had no idea about, but bands and artists that clearly shared a lot of connective tissue, a lot of DNA from the Wendy Carloses of the world, the kind of bands that you were listening to. So it's cool that this is a family podcast and that it's a family affair. I get to see how that manifested in the kind of music that Andrew was listening to, and thusly the kind of music that I was exposed to too, because a lot of those bands I pulled down from you, Stanley Clarke and Pat Metheny. I would have never known those bands if it weren't for you and Andrew. So You loom large in my musical history, Mr. Morrell. I appreciate it.
I'm honored. I mean, we used to back at the old college dorm. I found after several years, I finally connected with a like-minded roommate, who was interested in music, and of course, so we had all kinds of musical posters and stuff on the walls. But we would hold what would amount to like a music education session in the little dorm room. We'd say, come on in here. We're gonna play some of this Stanley Clarke, or we're gonna play some Chick Corea. Introduce you to stuff. Put down the REO Speedwagon for 20 minutes if you could.
Good God, please put it down longer.
the Kansas and the Sticks. I mean, all right. Yeah. You know those two. Here, listen to something different. Listen to some real musicians.
This has a little fiber in it. This has some nutritional value.
That's right.
We could go on. We could go on forever, Mr. Morrell. Truly,
I know.
And we will when I'm home for Thanksgiving. We'll have cocktails. It is that time to go to the board and see how you did, making your case for the perfection of Switched on Bach. I think you did pretty well. I'm going to go through your points that I gave you from the most recent to the beginning. I gave you 2,000. I gave actually 2,000 points in the favor of Michael for using the word screed correctly. So well done, Michael. That added to the case. 9,999 points for this repeating theme of the clarity of the production on the album, and just of all of the voices present on this album. It really adds something special that you don't get from a lot of classical music recordings. 300 points for the correct use of the word concerti, Mr. Morrell. Well done. 999 points for classitronic hits for Dad, even if it was never listened to. I'm glad you gave it to him. Hey, you got 999 points out of it, so there's your reward. 6,000 points for us being fellow euphonium aficionados.
There you go.
Underrated part of the band structure, and honestly, not that hard to play either, which it worked in its favor. 1,500 points for being present and in the midst of that musical hotbed in Georgia during your college years. That's a pretty special time to have been there. 7,000 points, speaking of which, for sticking to your principles and giving the big ol' FU to REM and their boring ass name. 3,000 points to Amanda Morrell for giving you the Moog calendar in 2020, or I guess it would have been 2019, Christmas of 2019. Excellent gift giving prowess, Amanda. And 900 points for your piano teacher quitting on you, and that being one of the best days of your childhood. Who knows what doors it unlocked for you? You if you would have been wasting your time playing piano, you wouldn't. Who knows what you wouldn't have done?
Maybe I would have got better. I don't know.
Who knows? Add all that to the A- that you gave Michael for his valiant 60-second intro effort on Wendy Carlos and Switched on Bach. This is looking like a pretty strong board to me, and we've been so anticipating this day. I think you did a great job, Mr. Morrell. But I leave it to Michael. Michael, you're the final say here. You've heard about the points on the board. You heard Mr. Morrell's argument. Tell me, is Switched on Bach by Wendy Carlos a perfect album? Does it go to 11?
Even though it definitely did trigger me a little bit from all those all the times I spent rehearsing my own prelude and fugue from the well-tempered clavier, I will say that yes, indeed, Mr. M, Wendy Carlos' Switched on Bach goes to 11. It's a perfect album.
Excellent.
Well, there's much rejoicing over here. Isn't there?
Good.
You guys keep it down, would you?
Yeah, we will.
But I appreciate that. Triggering aside, and Tyler, how many possible points are there? Is there a?
I'm gonna let you in on a secret. You ever see Whose Line Is It Anyway?
Yeah.
The points are all made up, and it doesn't matter. It's more, as the kids would say, we're going on vibes. That's what we're going on.
But I'm an engineer by training.
I know you are.
I need to add, but that's okay.
You know what? I'll give you a total. I'll send you a total, and we will post your total on social media so that everyone can see just how many points you got.
Oh, that's all right.
We need new social media content, so this is helpful for us, actually.
As long as you have a tote board, where do I rank with some of your other guests, especially my son?
Someday I will go back and I will go through all the points, and I will make that happen.
Yeah, there you go. And Michael, your use of the word screed, that's a great word, but you'd have to you got to read the Pat Metheny screed about Kenny G and see if how that holds up to
that's got to be
Wendy
a screed.
Carlos.
Oh,
It is a screed of all screeds. That's
quick aside before we bring this to a close. I'm pretty sure that one of the times that I saw Whitney Houston in concert, Kenny G was her opening act.
Yeah.
We won't hold it against her.
Yeah, I
Just
mean,
can't sell tickets.
Yeah, she was dealing with a lot. So yeah,
Truly.
Well,
Mr. M, it's really been a pleasure having you. You are always welcome back on this pod, and I can think of many artists that we might need to have you back on for. Not the least of which might be the Dan someday. Well, we're not going to play out today on a track due to fair use regulations and respecting Wendy Carlos's autonomy as an artist. But thanks so much for coming, Mr. M. Michael, I love you, buddy.
Love you too.
Yeah.
Thanks,
guys. I had fun. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Well, thanks everybody, and we will see you next week.
Bye.
All right.